Good Tuesday to you, everybody in COM 710. Welcome to week BAM 3. How's everybody doing? You hanging in there? You doing all right? New week, new readings, same semester. So it goes. Let me get a little additional coffee. There. Now, I am back, Dr. Jeff Gardner, your sufficiently caffeinated communication instructor for week 3. Before we get started, looking at the readings both for this week and last week, let me say a little something about your research topics. I've given feedback to everyone that put a research topic up. Specific comments for each of you, but some general observations. Okay, first and foremost, and this is the important one. No draft work, please. Let me say that again. No draft work. Let me say that one more time. No draft work. Neither in the form of your proposals nor in the form of part 1 of the whole paper. Remember, we're not doing 2 papers. We're doing 1 paper. We're not doing 2 papers. We're doing 1. This is part 1. When you turn in part 1, I cannot emphasize this enough. Do not turn in draft work. Turn in something that is as close to finished work as you can get. Okay, it's hard for me to evaluate your your position, where you're at as a writer and as a researcher, when what you give me are sketches. And hey, there's nothing wrong with them. There's nothing wrong with drafts. There's nothing wrong with sketches. I use them all the time. But I don't evaluate them in the same way that I would a nearly finished product. Okay, so there were some of you in the discussion forum that when you put up your topics, your approach is, well, I'm not sure. I could do this. I could do this. I could do this. Hey, what does Vox Populi think? That is the voice of the people. Okay, don't do that. Here's why. If you've heard me say this before, I beg your indulgence. And if you haven't, well, then here we go. As academics, as researchers, even as doctoral candidates, students, you are blessed. And here's what you're blessed with. You're blessed with a job that allows you to decide what you're going to work on. And it could be anything. That is a tremendous gift that you get as an academic or someone in the work here, doing academic work as a doctoral candidate such as you are. That is a tremendous gift. Okay, appreciate that. But in the same token, the gift brings an obligation. And that is, while you get to decide what it is you want to work on, anything in the world that melts your butter, your obligation is you have to, one, make a convincing argument that this is worth working on. I don't mean, well, yeah, in a way for you, but for all the rest of us that doing the work and reading it, right? And then number 2, that it means something. Remember what we're up to as communication professionals. We are like dwarves in a diamond mine. We are digging and we are obsessed. We are hyper-focused on 2 central questions. Okay? What is it that people do, and why do they do that? All right. So your blessing, work on anything you want, is at the same time your obligation. Justify to all the rest of us that this is something important beyond just being important to you. So you have to make this switch. All right. And you can think about it as a writer. You're making the switch from what could be called expressive writing, that is, it's meaningful to you because it's you, to communicative writing. It's meaningful to you because it's meaningful to other people. That's your obligation. You've got to get into that zone. And you can't get into that zone without something that approaches finished work. You certainly cannot get into that zone when you're asking other people, well, what do you think I should study? Okay, don't do that. All right. And I'm not taking it out of anybody in particular. All right. So please don't feel like I'm picking on you, because I'm not. All right. But as a general comment, watch out for that. Okay. Second thing I want to say is, yeah, okay. And you say, well, yeah, okay, Dr. Gardner, but coming up with these topics, especially when I'm not really familiar with the subject matter, is hard. Okay, I'm not going to disagree with you. You may not. I mean, you might be saying, well, if I knew, I've had an extensive background and knowledge in international global communications, I wouldn't be taking a class in it now, would I? Okay, fair enough again. Okay, so the second observation: be good to yourself as researchers. Be good to yourself. And here's how you're good to yourself as a researcher. Start your research, and I mean like up here. First, what is it that you think is important that's going on out there, and that's not going on out there, or has been going on that you think, yeah, maybe they're getting it kind of wrong. Okay. And then secondly, try to frame questions about that thing as either a hypothesis or a research question. And now I asked you last week, and we're going to cover this, to evaluate some of Vernon's research questions and to add some more on your own. And we're going to talk about what makes a good research question and what makes a research question that's going to cause you problems. All right. But so let me focus on an hypothesis right now. What makes an hypothesis functional and as such good for you, good to you, you being good to you, is it contains three elements. Number one, all right, it contains it contains at least two variables that have a causal relationship. What do I mean by that? Okay, so remember the old saying, okay, that correlation is not causation. What do we mean by that? That just because two things are happening at the same time, correlation, does not mean the one thing is causing the other. So, for instance, I have a rock. Actually, I have several rocks here. This is a piece of Mount Kilimanjaro that I picked up when I was climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, whence in Africa. And not just a remembrance, a souvenir. And yeah, I know I probably shouldn't take rocks from the places that I go. My bad. But this is not just a souvenir. No, this is a special rock. This rock is endowed with great power, because I have noticed that whenever I carry this rock outside of my house, there are no tigers in the town that I live in. This rock is absolutely 100% effective in keeping tigers away. All right. So whenever I'm outside with this rock, I don't see any tigers. Now, you see the problem there? Correlation, carrying rock, not seeing tigers, does not equal causation, rock keeping tigers away. Okay? So your hypothesis has three elements. Number one is a relationship between two variables that is causal, not just corollary. Number two, you're making a prediction about that causation. That, it usually goes something like, the more this happens, the more this happens, or the less this happens. The less this happens, the more this happens, or the less this happens, or whatever. Like, for instance, if I were to put a causal hypothesis forward concerning this rock, it would go something like and if I put it into sort of research speak, I would say the carrying of this rock in my pocket is positively correlated to a decline in tiger sightings in my town. Meaning, the more I carry this rock, the fewer tigers are seen. That's the second element of a hypothesis. All right, you're making a prediction about the causal relationship between the two variables. And then finally, third, the prediction has a direction. Okay, so the direction would be, the more I carry this rock, the fewer tigers there are. Not the fewer tigers there are, the more I carry this rock. And you might say, well, that doesn't make any sense. But I mean, let's just say, I lived in a town in which there were tigers, and I didn't carry rocks in my pocket when there are tigers because I can't run quickly with rocks in my pocket. So when there aren't tigers, I carry rocks in my pocket. Why do I carry rocks in my pocket? Stop asking questions. Okay, so formulate a hypothesis that helps frame the study. And that will clarify it to you. Now, why is this being good to yourself as a researcher? Well, it's being good to yourself as a researcher on a couple of levels. Number one, a well-framed hypothesis or a well-composed research question is going to tell you, first of all, what it is you should be focusing on. You do not have time. I do not have time to write the Encyclopedia Britannica about any topic. No. All research is bound by limitations, and the two limitations that bind all research are time and access. How much time do you have to get to the stuff do you need to write, to do the research and write it up? You have till the end of April. Not a lot of time. So a good hypothesis or research question is going to focus you on a specific topic. And hey, by the way, you don't have to cover it all and answer all questions about a thing. You can't do that. I don't expect you to. You cannot take the huge sum total of information and put it into a little teeny container that is a semester paper. Can't do it. Can't pour the ocean into a thimble. Don't expect you to. So don't worry about it. So number one, a good hypothesis or research question focuses your work on a specific portion of the topic. Number two, a good hypothesis or research question helps you decide, is there any there? Is this something that can be studied? Because if you want to hypothesize about the use of what type of Chinese characters in newspapers that are distributed in Taiwan, and you don't read Mandarin, yeah, you have a problem. And I don't read it either, so I would have a problem too. Okay, so it helps narrow the scope of what you can do by focusing on what you're doing. And then number three, the third thing is it's going to help you define your literature review. All right, because the broader the scope of the question that you ask, the more you're going to have to dig out to cover the background and who's already done the research concerning this broad scope topic that you have. Again, you don't want that because you have a limited amount of time and a limited amount of space. That is about 25 to 30 papers. So be good to yourself. Yeah, it takes a little intellectual work. Okay, but this more than anything else is what you should be focusing on during your training as a doctoral candidate in Regent. What is this that I'm referring to? Methodology. Perfect your methodology. Perfect how it is that you select topics, define them by way of hypotheses or research questions, and then begin the research into the data that's going to let you answer the research question or, because you can have them both, test the hypothesis. All right, that's what you're doing. Yeah, of course, you're memorizing a lot of stuff and you're pulling down a lot of theories and you're reading a lot of books and you're digesting a lot of raw material in that way. Yeah, I'm not saying that's not important. It is. But in the grand scheme of things, that's less important than learning the skills that let you process that stuff. Because you can, this is what separates, say, amateur historians from historians: methodology. You can memorize all kinds of facts, read all sorts of popular books. Great, fantastic. Knock yourself out. If you don't understand how to process that information, and as part of understanding how to process, how to separate, BS from the real beef, then you are what you are. You're just an amateur. But that's not who you are, and that's not what you're becoming. That's not what you're doing here. You're becoming professionals. You're becoming doctors. You will be excellent doctors. And as part of being doctors, your central skill is not going to be the ability to quickly recall names and facts. All right? No. Your central skill is going to be grounded in research and writing, knowing how to go get stuff and then how to organize it, put it together, the writing part, in a way that's cohesive and comprehensive to the audience. Communicative writing. Okay, sorry, don't mean to belabor the point. And look, and this is not an admonishment, but this is what you're up to. Okay, all right, let's take a look at the readings for this week real quickly. Week 3, here we're digging into methodology. All right, because first of all, we touched on this during week 1. We're talking about communication in a global environment. The question comes up: by what rubric and by what methodology, by what standard, if you will, do we evaluate different approaches to communication? Okay, so that's why, last week 1, I had you read and consider things like, what about rhetoric, and how do you construct some sort of a baseline to evaluate culturally very different without flipping on cultural filters in front of what we're doing. Okay, so we're continuing that we did some in week 2, and we're continuing that in week 3. All right, so that's what we're digging into. Okay, let's take a look at the readings from week 2, see what your answers are, see what we might add by way of useful information for you. Question number 1, why, according to Verne, is radio particularly useful and attractive, appealing, if you like, to women throughout the African countries she discusses? And we're talking about East Africa. And please, okay, Africa is a continent. It's not a country. It's a very big continent. And I've worked in, let me see, something like 8 or 9 different countries there. I've worked in the West Coast. I've worked on the East Coast. I've worked in the center. I've worked in the South. And I've even been in the North. And I'm telling you what, very different. Very different. Now, in sub-Saharan Africa, yes, true. And regionally, there are cultural similarities. And among the people there, there's an awareness, there's a push for a sort of a Pan-Africanism. Okay. But all the same, in terms of your language and your nomenclature, let's keep clarity in how we clarify. Africa is a continent, not a country. Okay. All right. Olivia, let's take you. You went first, and you slammed it. I mean, you just crushed this week. You were on top of every one of these questions, and you gave what I thought was, first of all, it was a detailed and very interesting response. You said, in responding to question 1, I found it helpful to examine the dissertation from which Vernon's text was derived, because this book is from her dissertation. Okay, so there are a number of factors that stand out. The women who participated in her study. I'm just going to summarize some of these. That is your responses. Number 1, the nation of Tanzania practiced polygamy. Adventists had expressed the requirement of having only one spouse if one were to be members of the church. Maasai men were not particularly enthusiastic. As a consequence, many more women joined the church than men. True. And I've worked in Tanzania, and I worked with a Catholic priest there. And you point this out, Olivia. One of the things that he mentioned was a challenge for him. He runs a hospital and a mission and a school, but also because many of the Maasai are Christian, and very proudly so, by the way, and they stand in stark opposition to, at least historically, a majority Muslim population, and besides, some of the significant divisions of faith between Christianity and Islam, stand in stark rejection of the practice of slavery, which was, and depending on some parts of the continent, still practiced within Islamic cultures. So anyway, so true. Number 2, with that demographic came also the opening of opportunities in the church for women. Societies in most African countries are patriarchal, heavily patriarchal. So this is a good point. Number 3, women became highly visible in the administration of church affairs. Number 4, Adventist church Couple their outreach efforts with that of health organizations that advocated against female genital mutilation. The Adventists used radio to get the word out and did so along with their evangelistic efforts. Okay, true. African women felt more empowered and open to discuss about issues that concern them. Affirming messages on the radio: active, receptive, rejective, apathetic, or passive response. Okay. This above criteria, classic case of entertainment education. Okay, boom. Excellent. Now, you might have also pointed out, and not like you got to cover all of Vernon in one discussion post, because again, Ocean and Two of Thimble can't do it, that many in Tanzania were not literate. And in particular, where education is concerned, that this was not something traditionally pushed for young girls as opposed to young boys. And so radio, which is an oral medium, that is, spoken and heard, was particularly attractive to women. Okay. Hearing was available via radio and made information impactful in that way. Okay. Excellent. Good answer. Now, from Vernon's studies and from what you point out, Olivia, I want you to keep something in mind as communication experts that you are, and becoming even better by the day, that newer, when we're talking about platform or medium, is not necessarily better. All right. So for example, many assume that the digital age has, brought about all things electronic, and anything that's not electronic is toast. It's done. Well, let me read to you very, very quickly, and I'll post the link in the announcement here when I send this out. Here's an article from the New York Post, and this was about a year ago, January 21, 2022. COVID lockdown apparently are good for at least one thing: all that extra time to spend flipping through a magazine. Down and out corner of the media industry has got an unexpected boost. COVID lockdown apparently are good for at least. Okay, so that's the slug. The second year of the pandemic brought a surprisingly sharp rebound in print magazines, fueled by special interest niches. Okay, new magazine launches totaled up 122, up from 60 that were launched in 2020. So in other words, there were double the number of new magazines that hit the scene, print magazines that hit the scene during lockdown. The data comes from the University of Mississippi's Magazine Innovation Center, a center that I'm very familiar with because I work in the publishing space. And that, by the way, if you're interested in any kind of a publication, whether it's online or offline, I highly recommend that you look at the University of Missouri Magazine's Innovation Center. There's some great resources in there. Okay. So quote from Samir Husni from the Magazine Center. If there's one word that sums up the recent crop of magazines, it's, quote, individualism. More individuals are finding an escape in print and sort of a validation of what they're doing. So niche, like gardening and home projects and women's interest and men's interest and these sorts of things. So one might not have expected that print actually expanded right smack in the, I don't think we peaked out in terms of technologies by which to encounter media, okay, because they continue to evolve. So be careful. Be cautious when you're evaluating. Don't go into an evaluation of a media platforms, medium, with the assumption that, that's old, that's past, that's done. Maybe not. Okay, number 2. What does Vernon investigate in her study, and what methodology does she employ? Can you think of another methodology she might have employed for her study? Okay, many of you took a stab at the methodology, but you forgot that second bit. How might she have otherwise attacked this? Okay. Most of you got this, obviously, wrong in the sense of either this or that, but most of you missed what I was hoping that you'd get at. And Shonda, and there were a lot of people, so I'm not picking on you, but I'm just going to read your answer. Vernon, to me, used 2 methods. The first method is historical. Next is comparative method. Okay. And there were a lot of people that answered like that. Okay, you're getting warm, but you're not quite there. Lauren, you're closer to on target. In her work, Verna examines linkage between religious broadcasts as AWR, Adventist World Radio, Africa, and the growth of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, SDA, in Tanzania. To achieve this, Vernon deployed an analysis of all radio archival documents. Okay, that's what she worked with. Excellent, excellent. I've always enjoyed the qualitative approach. Okay, that's what I'm looking for. She uses a qualitative methodology. Now, could she have done this in a quantitative way? Yeah. Okay. So, for you, doctoral candidates, it is imperative, meaning of the utmost importance, that you know you have it down cold, like the backs of your hands. The difference, the first two major methodological groups, qualitative, quantitative, and what applications, what processes fit under those headings and how they work. We're not going to go into it today because this is not a methodology class, but you might see either direct questions related to this or questions that revolve around this come up in places like, I don't know, comprehensive exams, a wink. Okay, make sure that you have this down cold. What is qualitative methodology? What is a qualitative methodology? What's a quantitative methodology? What do we mean when we say mixed methodology? What sorts of tests are qualitative? What kind of data do you need for a qualitative test? What sorts of tests fit under that rubric of quantitative? What kind of data do you need for what kind of quantitative tests? Sorry, folks, you just got to know it because it's your business. Okay, question number 3. Consider the research question and the 5 subsets in Chapter 1 of Vernon. Using the description of Vernon's case studies from Chapter 1, formulate 2 additional research questions, RQs. This is our abbreviation that you believe would be pertinent to Vernon's studies. Briefly justify your RQs. Okay, and here again, we have some room for refinement. Okay, Sean, I'm going to use you as an example. I think reading response for classmates, methods, question, etc., etc. Okay, you go. Here's your first RQ that you would suggest it. What was it about the program that drew members to the church? RQ number 2. What kind of impact has AWR had in the lives of people and advancing the church in its mission? Okay, so we talked a little bit about how to put together a hypothesis. Let's talk a little bit about how to formulate a research question. Now, the difference between a hypothesis and a research question, you might put it in this way. Hypotheses are close-ended. They make predictions about relationships between at least two, we use the term variables, but we just mean things, happenings. Words spoken, action taken, things watched, opinion developed. Whatever the two things are, the two happenings, that's a variable, okay? And it's closed. We're saying this causes this, and it goes in this direction. That's our hypothesis. Research question, on the other hand, you could categorize as open-ended. Doesn't make a prediction. It's sort of like, how does this work? Or what happens when this happens? We don't know. Okay? Again, back to being good to yourself as researchers. Be specific in your research questions. Now, you might have noticed, you might have looked at the research questions that Vernon put forward and then all the subsets, and you're going, wow, how many questions are you going to ask in the course of your dissertation? All right. Well, the reason that she breaks out so many research questions is for specificity. So, Sean, I'm just going to use you as an example. Nobody's picking on anybody. Okay. What is it about the program that drew members to the church? Okay. Be good to yourself. Which program? What do you mean drew members? Do you mean that they became interested and asked for more literature? Do you mean that they showed up and attended a service? Do you mean that they showed up, attended a service, and became members? What? And if you're saying, well, I'm thinking about all of those things. Yeah, okay, great. Break those out into separate research questions. Okay, Nicole, let's take a look at you. Research question number 1: how did religious programming change and evolve from 1983 to 2000, and is there a direct correlation with those changes and the increased SDA membership? Okay, so now we're getting a little tighter. We're getting a little bit more specific. But again, when you say religious programming, do you mean, because SDA radio is religious programming. So do you mean specific programs? And what do you mean by change and evolve? Do you mean content? Do you mean time frame? Do you mean audience aim? What? And I'm look, this, for Nicole and Sean, this isn't, me, Dr. Gardner, knocking you on the head with a wiffle bat. These are the questions that you want to be asking yourself to be good to yourself as a researcher. Okay. And is there a direct correlation with those changes in increased SDA membership? Now, when you're using these, and because we're communication people, so use your words carefully. I think what you're aiming at is there a causal relationship? Because correlation, well, yeah. I mean, you sort of tell me there's a correlation that the religious programming evolved from 1983 to 2008, and there was increased membership. That's correlation. They're happening at the same time. I think what you're after is causation. So say that. Okay? Say that. Be good to yourself as a researcher. Be clear. Anthony, let's take a look at one of your questions. How have SDA/AWR efforts continued influencing Tanzania's traditional religious media content to date? Okay, same thing here. Okay, efforts where? On the radio, in their sponsored health programs, influence what? Okay, meaning did the increase or the change in Adventist World Radio cause traditional media content to expand, that is more of it, or to contract? And then finally, what do you mean by traditional media content? Okay, do you mean spoken word? Do you mean print? Do you mean dance? What do you mean? Okay. Again, nobody's knocking anybody over the head. This is how you're good to yourself in formulating a research question. Try to be specific in the parameters, the when this, what about this, that you lay out. Okay, question number 4. The Seventh-day Adventist Church, SDA, was established in Battle Creek, Michigan in 1863. Given this, in your opinion, were the media efforts of SDA in Tanzania an example of cultural imperialism? If the international media landscape is flat or flattening, is the theory of cultural imperialism still relevant? All right, this is what I want you to spend time wrestling with. And to your credit, a lot of you did. You're like, yeah, and this is why. So I want to commend you on this one. Really good answers. All right, Marquette, let's see what you had to say. Culture is the lifestyle of a set of individuals. True, we're going to get into what culture is and is not here in just a minute, but that's Marquette. That's fair enough. It comprises the information, ideas, beliefs, values, requirements, sentiments prevailing in the group. Yeah, there's a couple things that we're leaving out here, but that's good. We're getting warmer. According to Charles A. Elwood, an American sociologist, tradition is the collective name for all conduct patterns socially acquired and socially transmitted by means of symbols, and that's true. Symbols can be the artifacts of culture, clothing, technologies, foods, okay? And symbols can be dance, styles, hairstyles, okay? So it's broad-based category. True enough. I believe the media efforts of the SDA is, and maybe was in here, an example of cultural imperialism. Third world nations are watching media crammed with Western world ways of life, believing and thinking. I'm not quite sure about using believing in that context, but let's move on. The third world cultures then begin to want to do the identical thing of their countries and destroy, of those countries, I think you mean, and destroy their very own culture. And cultural imperialism, principal keywords are culture and imperialism. Okay, we're going to come back to that. Okay, all right, fair enough. So let's stick a pin there in Marquette's response. Nicole, you take the opposite view. Boyd Barrett explains that cultural imperialism is the idea of a culture of one powerful institution having great unreciprocated influence on that of another less power identity that results in cultural domination of the lesser entity, leading to a pervasive and pernicious impact on the weaker. In other words, it's sort of stamped on it: do this or else. Um, uh, this definition is correct. So within it, and I think Olivia, you mentioned, in your answer at the top, interactions between people here in the United States, and this was a multi-ethnic interaction, by the way, and Native Americans. Okay, as far as the disease-ridden blankets, I mean, this was a tactic of war, and that really doesn't fall into the category of cultural imperialism, no more say than during the Indian Wars, let me recommend a book. I'm not going to put a link to this in the announcement, but I was thinking about this morning. That probably one of the better books, at least, that takes a look at the second episode of the wars with Native Americans and people from the United States, that is post Civil War, is this one by Peter Cousins, "The Earth is Weeping." This is an excellent, excellent book, very, very thorough. But anyway, disease-ridden blankets are not cultural imperialism. They were an artifact of war. In the same way that when Native Americans warred against each other, that they would leave poison food for their enemies, they would leave traps for their enemies. I mean, it's simply a way to afflict your enemies. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm not selling it. So hey, go drop off your disease-ridden blankets at the Goodwill. That's not what I'm getting at. Okay. Anyhow, but back to the example of cultural imperialism, because you did mention that, Olivia. If you look at how the United States really came to a point of okay, what do we do after the major tribes of the plains were defeated in this post-Civil War? Then they took them and said, okay, guess what? You're farmers now. And they took what was a nomadic hunter-gatherer culture and then just, boom, insisted that they become an agrarian culture. And it was a train wreck. And I grew up in and around Indian reservations, and it's still a train wreck. That's a story for a different day, but that's a good example of cultural imperialism. Okay, so back to you, Nicole. Sorry. Based on this definition, I do not believe the media efforts by SDA in Tanzania are an example of cultural imperialism. If that were the case, AWR and SDA would not have worked to broadcast religious content in languages of the people of Africa. They would have not have hired producers from within the people who understand the culture and speak the language. The goal was to spread the word in a way that the people of that region could understand and accept it or not. They had the freedom to listen or not, to join SDA or not. Okay. Good answer. Okay. So, I'm not going to tell you what side of this I come down on. Okay. Good answer for both of you, Marquette and Nicole. But let me encourage you as communication scholars to approach this topic that is cultural imperialism very carefully. All right. Why? Because as communication scholars, the rest of the population, as doctors, are going to be looking to you to say, well, what is it? All right. So make sure that you're thoroughly versed in definition and example. Stay away from biases, that is your own or others, from advocacy, that is your own or others. Remember, be an investigator, not an advocator. Okay. And understand, whatever side of this you fall on, here are some truisms about communication. The only constant in communication is change. Okay, that happens. That's the first thing. Second, that communication is a good indicator of culture. That is, because often, in fact, cultures, groups of people will broadcast what it is that they value and how they see the world through their communications. So you can, if you look for the connection, you can sort of trace it back. And understand that when we talk about culture is a set of habits that allow a people to adapt to circumstances in a particular place in a particular time.
Culture is not the artifacts produced by the culture. And I mean, like a vase in a museum or a certain food. And I will take a side on this business of cultural, so-called cultural appropriation is hogwash. If someone enjoys a particular type of food or a particular type of dress, you're no more. I mean, you simply cannot appropriate a culture. Now, you know, within the sphere of human relationships, you can admire cultural artifacts, dress, food, hairstyles, or you can ridicule cultural artifacts, dress, food, hairstyles. But that's just the difference between being a decent human being and being a jerk. Okay. If I came into communication as a historian. I did my first PhD in history. If you look at the history sweep of history throughout the world, one of the things that stands out is that peoples who, as part of their culture, part of the habits that they develop to deal with particular circumstances in a particular place in a particular time, if among those habits is adaptability and absorbability, those peoples tend to be successful. That is, they propagate who they are and how it is they see the world and where they go, more so than the peoples who do not. Those peoples that do not adapt and absorb different ways of dealing with the particular circumstances within which they live, they end up in the trash can of history. They fail. They fall away. Western culture, and now this is not a moralistic comparison. I'm not saying, oh, there's way up here, of which we all are. We're all Westerners. We grew up in a Western culture. It doesn't matter where you originated from ethnically. Western culture is a highly adaptive culture, and it comes out in the communications. Not just say, one of the things that always strikes me when I work abroad, especially say in places like the Middle East, is the homogenous nature of the culture. And that, especially when I'm gone for a while and I come back to the States, and just how all over it is. I mean, all over the place. I mean, I've been in major cities in the Middle East. I mean, you're talking about millions and millions of people, and good luck finding a Chinese restaurant. Now, I'm not saying there has to be a good Chinese restaurant in Cairo, and there are some. Okay. That's not my point. My point is that in the West, one of the things that marks the culture and the reason that Western culture has been successful is its adaptability and its willingness to absorb other things. So, for example, ballet. How's that word spelled? Why in English, in which there aren't silent letters, there are diphthongs, that is two letters pronounced as one, like neighbor. You don't say neighbor. Okay, ei, you say neighbor. It's called a diphthong when two letters make one pronunciation. Or defeat. You don't say diafut. Okay, that's different than a silent letter. We don't have silent letters, but we don't say ballet. We don't say gourmet. All right, why? Because we absorbed this from Western culture, absorbed this from French. And we don't even think about it. We don't even think about it. So, outside of blatant aggressive and I'm trying to remember now of the Boyd Barrett definition of cultural imperialism. I want you to think about this a little bit. I'm gonna leave you with this question. Okay. Again, I'm not going to take sides on this. I'll just leave you with this question. If a culture comes to another culture and introduces an idea, it's a proposition saying, hey, maybe you look at the world like this instead of like this. Is that imperialism? Is that imposition? Or is that the sharing of ideas? Which is the sharing of ideas, the lifeblood that is the thing that sustains a people and allows it to adapt. New ideas, new ways of looking at the world, new ways of adapting to the changing conditions that make up existence on planet Earth. All right, just a question. Okay, everybody, we're running along here. My apologies. Have a wonderful, wonderful week. I'll see you on Blackboard. God bless.